Welcome to Startup Wins. Twice a month, we share real stories and smart tips. Subscribe and join the journey.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome to Startup Wins. We are so fortunate to have an incredible guest here today. His name is Kevin Henrikson. Am I pronouncing it correct?
You got it.
Awesome.
How are you, Brennan?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us here today. I actually met Kevin on LinkedIn, or rather, I was maybe stalking him a little bit.
Love
it. He is, you haven't reached the top voices number yet, but I can see with your follower number, maybe at some point you might be there.
Yeah, these algorithms are always kind of changing. And for me, it's like I said, I get enough. We were talking a little bit before the show, I get enough personal satisfaction of either just a small number of people reading it and interacting with. And again, a lot of times it's people that I've worked with, 10, 20 years ago, reconnecting. And so to me, the numbers and the vanity followers and all those are like pretty cool. And it does show the sort of work you've put in. But at the end of the day, it ends up being like those connections. And again, like serendipitous stuff like this, where you reached out, I looked up your link, I'm like, oh, it's pretty interesting. I'm down to sort of, come on your show and talk. And so to me, it's like, again, thankful that the algos work the way they do and sort of connect people. And I think we have a bunch of stuff in common, just looking at some of your background and things you've worked on and stuff I've touched in the past, which is, always cool to see.
Yeah, no, 100%. But intelligent people typically will reply. The ones, and again, I can't say that they're not intelligent, but a lot of people sometimes look at the vanity metrics, and if they don't see Amazon or if they don't see Expedia on my profile, I would argue that they actually move on. And so just saying you're very intelligent, but
no, I think part of it's like, so it was interesting because Adam and I were talking, like we probably get 25 to 30 DMs a day on LinkedIn and probably 50 to 80 on X every day. And then probably 75 to 100 emails every day, kind of like in what I would call the personal branding kind of mailboxes. And so the sheer volume is incredible. And we were, kind of joking, what's the signal to noise ratio on that? And it's like definitely less than 1%. Cause I get, let's call it, 150 inbounds a day. Definitely less than one of those is interesting on average. Right. And so like on an average week, probably 2 to 3 are interesting, I would say, but that's over like, 700-800 sort of inbounds. And it's wild. And I think a lot of AI is driving this, but it's a wild how much content and, like you said, either unintelligent stuff or just unintelligible stuff or just kind of robotic, spamish kind of stuff where it's like people just hit the same pitch over and over and over. Right. And maybe that works if you send 1,000 and you get one back. But I think to me, and I don't do any outbounds. I don't DM. I don't, I'm probably the worst. My wife always jokes like, I love being invited places, but I never invite people to go places. And so I'm always like the receiver and not the giver. And it's like it's terrible in that sense. But it is a skill that like, I think more people could develop. And I think even I should, try it more. It's like, hey, I see something interesting. I should reach out and thank them, say something. And, just even if I send a handful a day, my sense is the hit rate on those would be probably higher than the hundreds I get because, like you said, the general sort of buzz of the noise is so high and so bad. Like the quality, you look at stuff and you're just like, man, like why is this person even sending this? Like, there's no way anybody would respond to this.
Right.
Hey, can't wait to help your development team with my offshore army of 122 people. And here's all these buzzwords and emoticons spammed. And you're like, okay, like you either spend a lot of time placing all the stars and the arm pumps and the thumbs up and this, gold, whatever's. And you're like, there's just you're clearly copy pasta in this thing into 100 different DMs a day. And it's like, that just can't be working. Right. So
it can't. I really question some of these people, but that's for another podcast. So, one reason, let's tell the guests, if you don't mind, a little bit about yourself. I mean, if somebody looks at your LinkedIn profile, they see Microsoft, they see Instacart, they see definitely a lot of brands that they're like, oh, this guy must have done some shit, So tell us a little bit more about yourself, and maybe we can kind of dive a little bit into some of those experiences.
Yeah, the short version. So grew up on a pig farm in Northern California, born in Oakland, and then went to school in LA. At UCLA as a mechanical engineer, but kind of graduated 99, 2000 and sort of shifted from like, well, I could build one airplane in my career or maybe 3 cars in my career if I became a mechanical engineer on physical things where I could build, a website every 10 minutes. And so the internet just obsessed me. And it was the first time I'd connected to the internet and seen that in college. And so kind of shifted mentally to doing software and things like that. And so then spent about 18 years doing email startups across both enterprise, open source, whatever, sort of culminating with building an email app that was called Acompli. So myself and about 10 others, we created an app that was called Acompli. 18 months later, we sold it to Microsoft, and then it was renamed Outlook. And so then we spent about 3 years at Microsoft scaling from, essentially zero to around 100 million users on Outlook Mobile. And then at the time I was running, several hundred engineers across 6 continents. And then, all of I guess 6 locations is 4 continents. And then all of non-Windows Outlook. So iOS, Android, and Mac were under me. And then after Microsoft left and went to a company called Instacart, which you mentioned, and, was just going to stay there for a little bit and kind of like, hey, I'd really been fascinated, Instacart had come to my house 700 times. But I thought it would be kind of cool to go on the other side. So got arranged to meet with the CEO and wasn't really interested in working there. Didn't think that would be the right thing. But I was like, well, I have the meeting. I'm like, I should go learn more about it. So I signed up to be a driver. I drove and did about 100 deliveries that week before I met with Apoorva. And when I walked in there, he's like, he was struggling with mobile and building some mobile stuff. He's like, hey, you worked on this thing, Outlook. Tell me about mobile. And I was like, no, let's talk about your app. And I'm like, he had all these screenshots and I had like this, 25-page document of screenshots and notes. And he's like, what, how did you know? I'm like, oh, I've been working for you already for a week as a driver. And funnily enough, delivering to like VCs and friends of family and stuff, because the kind of people that were using Instacart in Silicon Valley around my house were, obviously the same friends and family that we connected with in, sort of non-work life. And so that ended up turning into a pretty cool deal. So we joined there. Myself, my co-founder, and then a bunch of sort of engineers that we knew. And that went from like about 50 engineers to, closer to 2,000. Oh, wow. Obviously, the pandemic fueling that, hired hundreds of thousands of folks during pandemic and sort of saw, the cost of onboarding people. So sort of ran all of fulfillment and sort of that sort of arc of like hire to fire on the shopper side. And then left that and worked in crypto for a couple years with the NFT boom. And then for the last couple of years, really been focused on AI. And so how does AI come into all different companies and think of that as like, it's clear that everybody's talking about it these days, but what can actually be done with it? And we've decided that voice is the vector that we like the most. And so I've spent a lot of time building in both regulated spaces around healthcare, insurance, fintech, and then also non-regulated spaces. So imagine the high school kid that's answering the phone behind any business that you walk into. How do we have AI take those calls? And then in some cases, looking at sort of acquiring call centers and then transitioning those workflows from human-led to sort of AI-led. And then, whether it's assistive or whether it's complete replacement really depends on the use case, but really seeing a bunch of cool advances. And, I think the tech's changing every day, which makes the space pretty fun. So that's kind of how we got to here.
That's exciting. And voice is, I think, quite powerful, right? I mean, a lot of our lives are impacted by voice in so many different ways. So can you maybe elaborate like this incredible path, from building a startup that gets acquired to one of the biggest companies technologically in the world, right? You're literally building potentially one of the biggest or best email engines or email, and then you go to one of the most popular startups. So it's like, it feels like you probably have almost any opportunity. And so you're now diving into voice. AI, obviously everybody's jumping in, but tell us more about why voice.
Yeah. So if you think about when you've ever had a problem in your life with a vendor, with an individual, typically the final straw is you make a call, right? You try email, you try text. Nobody really likes to get on the phone. I don't know. Like there's certain people that love calling, but I think the default mode when you're like, even like sending a package back to Amazon or complaining with your cable provider, when you really need it to be solved, you call your doctor. But when you get on that phone, whoever picks up that phone, your mental model is they can do anything that company is. So you can call that company and complain about the CEO, complain about their pricing, make a support request. That person represents the entire company and the entire brand, even if it's like a multinational company with hundreds of thousands of employees. Once you get them on the phone, you feel that connection that they can get to whoever you need to get them to. And so there's no question that's off limits, right? You literally can ask for anything, get escalated, transferred, where with all other mediums, text, email, all those things feel a lot less connective where you kind of asynchronously send something in. Maybe it gets there, maybe it doesn't, maybe they got the message, maybe they didn't. But when you're on the phone and somebody picks up that phone, you know that they're going to do it. And your goal is to get something done, or you want something achieved. And the ultimate best satisfaction is that you make one call and that person's able to achieve it. They have the right access to the system, or they get you the right person, or they transfer you, whatever it is. And if you record that call, it's very, very objective if that call was successful. You can listen to that and be like, yep, they asked for X, they had this exchange, this was the emotion, it felt like the customer was happy, they said thank you at the end, or they flipped them off and was hung up the phone and screaming at them, right? Like, you have a very clear view. So the ability to build reinforcement learning and really do that, while it's difficult for voice, it's pretty authoritatively like, was that call successful? Most people can listen to a call and agree like, yep, successful, or nope, wasn't successful. So we picked voice for that reason. And it's also this like, if you are a successful voice agent, then you honestly are successful at sort of understanding all of the intelligence of that business. Because if I can answer every single call that comes in and successfully achieve it, you've probably also built an intelligence layer or an intelligence engine inside that company that can access all the critical systems, can reschedule appointments, it can book meetings, it can, refund things, it can cancel accounts, it can sign up for new accounts, it can send a message to the CEO, it can, send a message to compliance, it can log a complaint, it can log a feature request. Again, if it's doing it fully autonomously and successful. So we like voice because of the power of it, the objectability of deciding whether it was good or bad, and the fact that it is, when done correctly and fully solved, you've sort of built an intelligence layer for the entire business. And so that, we think the depth there today. And, I think there's a lot of stuff that, hey, everybody says, hey, the stuff that was hard is now going to be easy with AI, and the stuff that impossible is now going to be hard. And I think building a voice agent today that sort of does that is pretty close to impossible, right? And so we like that space because we think it's going to be a lot of work to be successful there. And also it's that final thing where in all the companies I've worked for in the past, we tried to avoid phone calls. We introduced chat. We introduced email, everything we could to not have to take calls. Because if you're a call center agent, they can handle one call at a time, right? Whereas if you're email or chat, all the chat interfaces have 3 or 4 boxes. And you can tell when you're chatting with a company, you're like, man, they're pretty slow to respond. Why? Because they're working on 5 or 6 different chats at the same time.
Right.
It's not clear when they're going to get back to you, where voice doesn't have that. So voice is very, very expensive, even if you've offshored it, because it's still 1 human hour, 1 human minute for every minute that an individual spends on the line. So that's kind of like a really short summary, but we think that that's universally applicable because everybody in the world, when you really need something done, you make a call.
It sounds like a large TAM. Like,
a lot of phone numbers in the world, a lot of voice minutes in the world.
So it sounds like people will probably be banging at your door to get investments or opportunities jumping in. So congratulations on that. It sounds like a pretty exciting, I guess, new venture that you're definitely jumping into. I think we could literally talk about that one forever. But what we'll do is maybe, if you don't mind, because like I had mentioned before the show too, I'm hoping maybe we can give some really insightful thoughts as far as like, if you can reflect back and then maybe compare with the current environment, like some of the things that you'd learned, and then maybe even stuff that you might be like, I wouldn't do that ever again. Let's maybe talk about 1 or 2, if you can think of. I mean, you primarily manage engineering teams, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe right at the beginning, for example, when you built that email client, were you the head engineer, or were you a part of a team, or can you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah. So for Acompli, I was the head of engineering. I was the VP of engineering. I think we were all I was co-founder of the company with my friend JJ and Javier. And so the 3 of us, we're all technical. So we're all engineers, sort of by training. I would say I'm not great at coding. Like I never was like an amazing coder. I was always at best, B-. I think some of my peers would probably say C-. But I was good at talking and good at solutions. And so like I was sort of known for being able to just come in and figure out the problem and fix it. Wasn't the most delightful or architecturally perfect fix, but it got the job done and achieved the objective. And so very objective focused. But then that sort of spun into like, well, at the end of the day, really technology is just solving a problem, and then solving problems kind of the root of capitalism. And so like, it was like, how do I use technology to, become a capitalist and build companies, right? And so on the email app, it was really like, how do we solve a problem? We saw Mailbox, which was an email startup that got acquired by Dropbox. that had this really cool thing where they had a video where it was just you swipe your emails away. It was the first kind of one that had that swipe gesture in the inbox for emails, and swipe right to archive, swipe left to, trash or snooze. And that notion that they got acquired, but it was only focused on Gmail, felt very opposite to us doing 15 years of email and saying, wait a minute, but most companies don't use Gmail. They use Microsoft Exchange, right? And again, this is going back to like 2012, 2013 timeframe. And so the only people that use Gmail were like small companies, startups, or Silicon Valley startups, because Gmail was just a much smaller company from a enterprise sort of email state. And so our view is like, well, everybody has Gmail for personal work of our friends, but most of them still use Exchange at work. How do we put that together? And then when you look at your phone, the iPhone was the most popular phone in the Valley, and it was like email, contacts, and calendar were like 3 separate apps, and they still are today. And our view was like, well, that's not how you think. Like, you really think that that's one thing. And so when we put those together, it really sort of created a new sort of productivity app. And so for me, I was like QA, product manager, and I also ran and hired all the engineers. And so, but I was just the user of it, man. I was commuting on Caltrain. I was on bus. I would try it in all these really crappy, phone environments when I was flying, and saying like, how do we make the best mobile email app that makes me feel more productive? And my co-founders and our small team of 10, that sort of drove us into an email client that we felt that, other people would like too. And, it ended up being enough that Microsoft liked it to buy it and call it Outlook.
Interesting. What are some of the things that you can remember when you were hiring, and you still hire to this day, right? Like, what are some things that you look for in these engineers? Like, do pedigrees matter? And I do have one other question, because you seem like a really nice guy, or at least you seem like you would be someone I would like to work for. But I'm going to ask you later, and I'm just so I don't forget, if being a hard ass is important. But before we get to that question, what are some things that you actually look for in engineers, and what seemed to work?
Yeah. In a single word, it's curiosity. And that's never changed in 30 years of hiring engineers. And even myself, like, I feel like one of my biggest traits is just this endless curiosity of, how do things work? How do I figure it out? How do I solve it? How do I get to the next step? And so we look for engineers that are successful and curious. And obviously you want them to be smart and technical. And if they have other experiences, that's helpful in orienting them around solving problems that they may have seen before. But really the best startups and the hardest problems, you're not going to know. Like, nobody has solved voice AI today, just like nobody had solved mobile email the way we had eventually solved it with Acompli and then Microsoft. You can't hire somebody to be like, oh, they're the best email expert, because all they're going to know how to do is the way it's been done for 20 years and not the way we think it's going to do in the next 20 years or even the next year. And so for us, you want people that are curious enough to like run into hard problems, and then tenacious enough to want to go solve them. And part of that comes out in questioning, what they've done and how they've worked on it, and how do they work with teams. And, so some of the questions that I ask are like, oh, you're on this team of 10 people. What rank yourself? Were you the most senior person, the most junior person? And that answer doesn't matter as much as like, how do you interact with the team? Do you ask a lot of questions? When you have a question on something, what happens? And somebody like, well, I don't have a lot of questions. Everybody comes to me. You're like, oh, that's a good thing, because you've kind of had a lot of curiosity, right? Like, you've figured out stuff that other people haven't. And so those kind of questions tease out, like, nobody's going to say, I'm like, are you a curious person? That's not it's too direct of a question to get the real answer. Where as they start to talk, they're like, oh, I'm really interested in this thing, or I have this deep obsession with building games, and I've really built game companies, and I have this side project that I've worked on forever that I'm very passionate about. And so this passion and connection, like, all those are indications of curiosity, which will lead well, in our sense of like people that are, that are going to want to learn, that are going to want to like figure things out that haven't been figured out, and that are also tenacious enough to lean into something and aren't afraid of like not knowing the answer or not knowing what's going to be figured out. So I think those are like, again, those are quick things. I think as you start and hire your first 5 engineers, you're looking for generalists that sort of can span front end, back end, new tech, old tech. And then as you get larger, so if you look at when, I'm hiring for the first 2 engineers at Acompli versus hiring for engineer 702 at Microsoft, now you're looking for people that are going to work well in a Microsoft environment. And then they're partly because of the funnel, Microsoft has access to all the top universities and all the top schools. And so we're recruiting, almost by default from pedigreed type schools and programs, because we have those sort of relationships set up. And then you're looking inside of all those pedigreed, a lot of times at Microsoft, they're like, here's the hiring class of, there's 30 new hires and they're already hired. And now you're just almost recruiting them to be on your, out of that 30, which of those 2 do you want to join your team for this like hiring batch? And then, it's a little different question, because now you're saying out of those 30, they've all passed the Microsoft test. They're all smart. They're all great. Many of them are returning interns. Which 2 are going to be the most successful? And then it's really filling out your team. Hey, I have I want somebody that's interested in data analytics, or somebody that's interested in performance optimization. And so you're looking for indications that not only fit curiosity, but also map to like, kind of roles or positions on your team that you want to sort of almost like a draft, right? It looks more like a draft where you're like, oh, I really need a quarterback this time. Oh no, I need a defensive end, really struggling in the secondary, going to go recruit a safety, right? And so I think of it, hiring at larger companies in these pool-based models looks like that.
Wow. You mentioned tenacity as one of the qualities that you're looking for in engineers, but how do you dig up tenacity in the interviews, or can were there any things that would signal that kind of, I guess, quality in a person?
Yeah. So typically you look for things like, ask a question like, what's the toughest thing you had to solve in your last company? And then what did you do? Oh, I phoned a friend. Oh, I figured this out. Oh, I went to a conference. Oh, I Googled it. Just start to look like, okay, let them self-describe what the hard thing is. And just by them describing what that is, you'll know how much like in the shit they got. Like, because if you're like, hey, I worked at this company for 5 years and I was, a mobile engineer, or I was a, backend engineer or a database engineer. And the trickiest thing I got was something that I don't classify as tricky out of all of the sort of pattern matching I've done. You're like, well, you never really got to something hard. So there's 2 reasons for that. One is that you just happened to be in a company where there was no hard things, but that's probably not true. It's probably there was hard things, but you never got assigned those projects, or you didn't find a way to get on that area, or you weren't the one tapped when it was like, we need to make this work. Game's on the line. 10 seconds left. We got 1 play. And we're going to have to, who's getting the ball? If you're not the one getting that call, you probably haven't shown and demonstrated the skills that leaned you into being in those positions. And so a lot of those signals come out in like asking some of these questions of like, what was the hardest thing? What role did you play? How many times did you work late at night or early in the morning? So some of these, it depends, right? And those aren't always the signal, but that adds up to a set of things where you're like, oh, when we really need to make this happen, this client's problem, like, you'll have people say like, oh, well, we had one of our biggest clients looking to churn because they had a big outage. What did they do? And you're like, oh, I got to take notes in the meeting. They're like, no, they bought me a plane ticket and I was on the plane that night at 11 p.m. and I showed up at 6 a.m. in the customer's office.
Right.
And you're like, and again, this is like, pre-COVID world where that kind of stuff mattered. But those kind of things are where you're like, okay, there's an indication of like, you were the chosen one to get on the plane. You were the chosen one to go lead that. You were the one to bring the team together to design that. Those are attributes that are like, I've found work well in entrepreneurial type of ventures. And even when I'm hiring for big teams, I still want that entrepreneurial sort of high agency sort of viewpoint, even if I'm bringing you in as employee number 700 onto my team at Microsoft.
Well, if you have that mindset, I would assume that they're also very independent in terms of the way they behave. And what I warned you about earlier was, how hard-ass do you have to be as their boss? And does that conflict, right? Because their way versus your way and how you guide them down that path.
Yeah. So I think for me, like, I'm an incredibly hands-off leader. So I like to have like a very small number of reports, even when these teams get very large. Like I think at Microsoft, when I had, like I said, many hundreds of people, I probably had 4 direct reports. Like 2 people had like basically half the team each. And then I had 2 people with smaller teams and then an admin. And I like it that way so that I can sort of ride above that and work across those without having to do a lot of the like day-to-day people management. And then when the teams are smaller, everybody reports to you in a more flat way. But I think I look for people and I want people reporting to me that don't need a lot of handholding and that are independent by choice. I think what you describe is this notion of like, if they're so independent that they're not shareholder aligned, right? Because no matter what company we're in, whether it's a small one and we're like, we are the shareholders because we're all startup employees, or it's a big one and, by proxy, we're all Microsoft shareholders, even in a small sense. But at the end of the day, like, if we're optimizing on shareholder value anywhere in the org, whether it's small company, big company, or super multi-conglomerate, that generally is an easy thing to get more budget for, more team support for, and hard to argue against as being wrong. Right? You're like, is this driving shareholder value? You're like, oh, this doesn't really matter. We're working on some random bug system down in this random tool. You're like, yeah, but you should be able to draw a pretty direct line to like this adding shareholder value, or we're sort of just doing a bad job as stewards of capital of that. And so to me, the hard ass part comes in when you find people that are like, I'm wasting the company's money, or I'm a crazy like manic negotiator with vendors to a fault potentially. There's still vendors that, they see me and they're like, oh, I ran into one a while back and he was like, oh, I remember that negotiation 7 years ago. You were the one that squoze us the hardest. And I always have this viewpoint that like part of being able to have those, sort of hard negotiations or hard discussions is because you created a framework in your mind of where the value's at. And I think that applies to managing people, right? Hey, what do I value in a team member? I value in myself. I hold myself to the same standard. And so like my view is like, I'd rather have a smaller boat with bigger rowers than a huge boat of weak rowers. Right. And so like, right. To me, it's this idea that like, you want to look around and you've worked on teams, you've been with companies, you look around and there's nothing worse than sitting on a boat rowing and looking over the guy next to you slacking or the woman next to you slacking. You're like, bro, like, let's go. And so lack of sense of urgency, lack of purpose, lack of drive, it's the worst thing for your high performers to have like mediocre or low performers sitting around them because it's demotivating.
Right.
Whereas the reverse is true where you see everybody and they're like, come on, man, row harder. You got that. Like, then you do row harder because you're like, we're in this together and everybody gives that extra 10%. And that, that's what makes a difference between winning and losing. I mean, there was 50 other email apps already running on the App Store. And there still is today. There's always 50 or 60 email apps on the App Store and probably even more if we, go out to ones that are kind of walking dead.
Right.
And we decided to start a new email app and somehow rose up to be the one that became, essentially the number one in the sense that we're, the email app representing the biggest email franchise in the world.
Right.
And so I think to find people like that and how to be a hard ass on them is if your hard assness is like, guys, like the goal is to win the race, don't break the boat and don't break your friends. But other than that, like no rules, like we're going as hard as we can. And you never, ever found the bottom. And I think that's something my, dad was in the military, like Navy. And so like there was always this notion, if you look at like SEAL training or any of these like sort of survivor type views of like military stuff, like you always have more to give. Like when you finally are tired and your body's about to break, you're like 40% in, right? Or, there is like a deep, deep tank in human nature. And being able to find a way to sustainably access that deeper tank and motivate people, very hard to do that with a whip or a stick, right? It's got to be a carrot and it's got to come from within. Because like I can even dangle lots of money in front of people in carrots. And like, honestly, like that's not going to trick your brain to be like, this is the time to go beyond what's comfortable. And so to me, the motivating factor is not like a hard ass and like, hey, you're carrying a big stick and banging on people or even carrying a big fishing pole with a carrot trying to drag people towards the reward or money. You have to create that internal sense of like, okay, we're living for a bigger purpose here and we're doing it together. And this notion of teams, and you see like the championship teams of any professional sport or any kind of like really competitive situation, it ends up being the winner, the ultimate winner in really competitive things is like they wanted it more. They had drive. They were hurt somewhere in life and they were willing to prove themselves. Like it's never like, oh, they just happened to show up and just happened to, no, they put in years right. or decades of experience to know like what they were capable of and then also be able in that moment to find like that extra gear, that extra 10% that other people were like, it just wasn't possible.
Interesting. Part of the reason why I was asking that question is because at least you'll see in the media, stories about Ballmer throwing a chair across the room. Maybe you've even experienced it.
Yeah, I worked with the guy. So I worked with the guy. He came to VMware afterwards because a lot of Microsoft guys came to VMware afterwards and, incredible engineer. And like, I think they would never like say, hey, whether it happened or not. He was like, yeah, it definitely happened. He was there, right? When he was in the room, he was the guy, right? And he, after VMware, I think he went to Google. But it's like, you look at that experience and you're like, again, there's a version of you ask him, you're like, oh, was that malicious or whatever? And like the media made it like, oh, Ballmer's crazy and throwing chairs and he's like, off the rocker. And again, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I would say some version of like, it's like the coach going in and screaming at the football team and throwing a helmet across the thing. You're like, could argue whether that's safe or correct or whatever. Yeah. But at the end of the day, like the people in the room that knew is like, the coach just wanted it as bad as we did. And like, there was that it was a competitive spirit kind of thing that was like at some level honor and respect, and not like, oh, there's this threatening thing being thrown across the room and it's, I'm pissed. It's like, he's that competitive and he wants to win that bad.
Right.
That he's, and you see him in the basketball games on the, when he was on the team and like on the floor, like he is an intense dude.
Yeah.
And like that level of competitiveness, and to be able to run with Gates for those many years and really run the organization the way he did. Again, not to say he was as impactful or as effective as Gates or now, Satya, who was there when I was there, but very different styles, but all equally or arguably, Satya probably being the most effective of being able to do that without throwing chairs and out having.
Right.
Satya is an incredibly intense dude, but doesn't show up that way. He's intense with the words and choice and how he leads, and it's a much quieter sort of leadership style, where Ballmer's much more boisterous, and Gates is also intense, like publicly, like has a great PR sort of face to him, but privately, the famous quote, "That's the stupidest fucking thing ever," is like, he's literally believes that. Yeah. And Steve's like, these guys are like that, man, these are just intense guys. And so I guess my sense is that intensity comes out in different ways. And again, like culture and sort of what's right and how woke people are and what the view of the culture and norms are has changed over the last few decades. But I think the underlying principle there of like the best winners are hyper competitive and they're very intense, even though that intensity shows up in different ways for different people.
Yeah, no, I've worked for Barton. I don't know if you know Rich. And I've worked for Kevin O'Connor, who created DoubleClick and then got gobbled up by Google. And I was contrasting their styles. And I also saw Bezos periodically when I was at Amazon. And it was just, I was just kind of watching to see what seemed to work. And, like that quote you said from Gates, I think Bezos did that a lot. He said, like, that's the stupidest whatever, right?
Yeah.
And, but Barton was different. He kind of sat back and let us do things. And I sometimes, he was just recently interviewed by Tim Ferriss. And when I was listening to it, it kind of seemed the same style. Like he's just kind of chill and let people kind of do what they do. But at the same time, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, that's the reason why Expedia didn't crush the competition, whereas Microsoft kind of did. And then also with Kevin O'Connor, he taught me. So I asked him to be my mentor. This is when we were like 800 people. I was a little lowly, whatever. And I just emailed him, said, could you be my mentor? And then everybody thought I was going to get fired. But, instead, Kevin replies back and he goes, no, I won't be your mentor, but I'll buy you lunch. And so we sat down. It was one of the most uncomfortable conversations of my life, because he has this style where when you ask him a question, he pauses for like 15, 16 seconds.
Yeah.
And, like you and I right now are kind of vibing, whatever, right? But it's like, and then as you answer the question, he interrupts you with his answer. And so it's this weird interaction. But I remember one thing in particular he said. He believes in basically Andy Grove's only the paranoid survive. Do you believe that, out of curiosity?
I think so. I do think, like, I mean, part of this is like there's a lot of the competition's hard out there, right? So you have to really push and you have to, sort of hallucinate a little bit on what's possible, both on like a dreaming big and vision type of thing, but also obsess over the little things and sort of be paranoid about like, well, this could be that, and like running this, sort of flow chart of the possibilities. Cause I think the best way to categorize it is just like approaching things with a prepared mind, where you've thought about all the different cases. So when you are hit with that decision and you have to make a real time or sort of like quick decision, it could look like you're just whipping it from your hip and like pulling something out, when in reality you've ran this games thing and you've thought about all the different options. And so what looks like an in the moment quick decision is actually months or years or decades of paranoia of thinking about all the different situations. And when you're in that situation, your prepared mind just kind of reacts out of habit. And so I think there is something to that.
Yeah, that's a great answer, to be honest. So I'm going to hit on one more kind of topic, if you don't mind, before maybe we kind of wrap things up, because I feel like you and I probably could talk forever. You have so much to share, and I want to respect your time. And we're kind of coming up to the hour anyway. But one last thing is more education related, because my previous podcast was called Educate. and we were examining education in the whole scheme of how life is. One thing that you did was you graduated from UCLA. And today, UCLA is one of the hardest public schools to get into. I think they have over 100,000 applicants for every year now. And I think they are number one as far as public. I have a history or a background in tutoring these kids. And it's funny because I taught one kid who couldn't even speak English, or rather, I got him into UCLA by helping him with his personal statement and getting his higher score on ACT. But now I look back on it and I think, was that a mistake? Because I artificially helped him get into that program. But yet, is he getting the benefits from that brand? Can I ask, did UCLA prepare you for your life? And then on top of that, when you look at candidates and you see UCLA or Harvard or whatever, do you automatically give them extra credit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the school thing is something I think a lot about, for my own kids and things of that nature. And how does that impact what it is? And I think the competitiveness of the college system globally, but even in the US, is an acute thing. And especially, like you said, in California with UCs, like it's just too easy. I mean, to apply to a UC is like you fill out one application and check 15 boxes and just pay the fee. And so that, makes it very easy to apply to a lot of these schools. So that, inflates the numbers. But to your point, it's harder and harder to get into these schools. So I think the first part of the answer is like, did UCLA help or prepare me? For sure, I knew more and I was more confident and learned things, the last day of UCLA versus the first day. And I think it's funny because I have this like talk of the 12 things I learned in college that I've given to, college students at more than 15 times. I used it for college recruiting for years when I was at VMware and Microsoft. And the kind of things are not, I learned this thing in the thermodynamics class, or I learned this thing in chemistry too, but more around lessons around like, I'll give you one, which is like, don't be the last one at a party, right? And so when you're at a party in college and, it's going late into the night, 2, 3 in the morning, everybody's drinking. And then, what happens? Every party ends with the police coming or noise complaint or something. Like they don't just end on their own.
Right.
And so when you see the party starting to dwindle and things starting to get crazy and people starting to throw stuff and being stupid, you're like, you just don't want to be there. Right. And I think I liken that to startups or companies where you're at a company and people start leaving and you're like, oh, this isn't looking weird. Like, oh, the best people are leaving. And pretty soon, just like when you're the last one at the party, you may not get arrested. You may not have, but you may have to talk to the cop and have an uncomfortable ending and being like walked out with flashlights or something. Whereas if you're the last one at a startup, you're going to be helping them pack up and bankrupt the thing and you're laid off and you're sort of branded as somebody that sort of went down with the ship versus realizing like, hey man, this isn't my thing. It's time to go and move on to better pastures. And so I think there's a bunch of lessons that came out of my time at UCLA that honestly, I probably would have learned 80, 90% of them at any sort of college that I went to be, quite frank. I don't know, right? Like hard to say. I only had one shot at it and went through it one time.
Yeah.
But to me, so I think there is a value in going to the college system, going through the process of, applying and finding a school that fits you. And when I tell my kids, like, to me, the biggest thing is finding a school that fits you. It's like, yeah, there are competitive ones and hot ones. And, for every person I know at Harvard that's done great, I know a lot of them that have went to Harvard and then went on to get there, or MIT or, pick your fancy school. My wife went to MIT and like, they went to these incredible schools that have arguably underachieved, right? Like they went to the top tier, top 5 university and they're barely a junior product manager after their MBA. And they just, went from like, they just aren't delivering. What now? Everybody hears the stories of like, oh, the MBA or the Harvard thing, and they started a company, became Zuck, or dropped out. Like I think those exist, but I think for every sort of person that went to a pedigreed school, some of the best people I've worked with never went to college. They literally were, either dropouts or barely finished high school. And they were incredible engineers, incredible entrepreneurs. And so to me, it's way more the person and the gauntlet of how they got there and the hardships that they got, whether it was through a school system or not through a school system, I think are less impactful. And so to me, when I look at resumes, the school is like a hoop. And it's like, hey, if you got into one of these top universities, you probably are pretty good at taking tests and following directions. But if I see that and all I see is you volunteering at the school and doing that, and you're not technical or you're not starting something, like you may just be you may not be a good fit for a small startup because you may not have the sort of diversity and sort of experience, but also the sort of like independence of like being able to go figure stuff out for your own, because you've just been great at like given a rubric. And there's a rubric. Like, everybody says it's hard to get into Harvard or Princeton. And it is. But like, if you start in like, 6th, 7th grade and be like, hey, I'm just going to get straight A's. I'm going to take all the hardest classes. I'm going to get a perfect score in all of them. I'm going to grind on that. I'm going to, get a perfect SAT score. And I'm going to have 4.5, extracurriculars. And I'm going to be the best in the world at 2 of them, right? Or in 1 of them. I'm going to be the, not just I'm going to do Taekwondo, but I'm going to win the Taekwondo championship at the national level, right?
Right.
And I'm going to have straight A's and be the ballot. You've got a shot at getting into Harvard, a way better shot than somebody that doesn't. So I think there's formulas to give you high percentage to go get into these top schools, but that doesn't always necessarily equate to being great in business or great employees or something like that. You may be great in academia. You may be the greatest to go do PhDs and teach and stuff because you're good at taking tests and doing school. So I think the short answer is it depends. I think the longer answer is like you have to look at that whole story. I'm looking at a resume recently of a graduating senior, computer science degree, looks amazing, but like no work experience that's technical. So as the resume is like 3 kind of school projects. They're like personal projects, but they were probably for classes. And then the activities were like, worked at a hotel, worked at a Dave & Buster's, and then worked at like a fast food chain. Like those were their 3 summer jobs. Like, and you're like, wait, you're studying computer science, but you're like not doing anything technical or computer. I mean, at least go be the IT guy or the IT girl at the local university or something that at least gets you into that if you really want to go be a computer scientist. And so when I look at that, I'm like, man, I don't want to be the first one to like give them their first computer job. Like they haven't even tried. Like they missed 4 opportunities to go take a technical job on the way there.
Right.
And so I think for me, the school is like one factor, but by far not the leading one in terms of deciding whether they're in or not.
I see. I lied. I'm gonna ask a little more on this because honestly, what I hear from you, because you also started off by explaining where you came from with the farm and all that, right? I feel like you have grit. Like you have grit more than the average person, but now you're raising kids, right? They didn't get raised on a farm, I imagine. Yes?
No.
So how do we teach these kids grit? This upcoming generation that loves death scrolling or whatever it's called. And I wonder, because like I always like hypothesize, like I'm just going to throw my kids in a forest and see if they can survive. But obviously I have not. When I reflect back on it, because we've had some other drama in the family, some of that drama actually created the grit. And I'm curious, like, do you proactively put that on them or anyway?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. Again, I mean, my kids have worked on the farm. They've been out to the farm, visited it and things like that. And they've spent days on it. Like definitely not like, months or weeks like I, or year, 20 years like I did. And so I think they've seen that, learn to drive tractors, learn to, go mow the lawn, do things that are like more physical. I think the thing that, and my mom's 81 now, but I think the things that like, and she still like rides the riding mower and mows the lawn and gets the mail and does all the stuff. And like when we go out there, she's always got a project. And so like the project's like, hey, go stack a bunch of wood, or hey, go, do the tune-up kit on the lawnmower. We need to go take the engine apart, change the oil, put a spark plug in. And so like, it's all stuff that I obviously know how to do, but like, I pay somebody to do that stuff at my house anymore. I don't like do it anymore. But I think watching the kids see me like not sit in front of a computer and just yell at a mic and talk to these machines and like type all day. And I think there's that sort of osmosis view, and then them getting to participate. And then I also try to take vacations that are weird. Like we took like my daughter on like a horse packing trip. So you go out in the Sierras and you put a bunch of your like camping gear on these donkeys and you ride them up into the Sierras, and you're like kind of disconnected from everything, internet, cell phones, just nothing works up there. And then you're at this like incredible quiet lake and you throw a hook in the line and like fish or bite, like whatever. And then you cook the fish and eat it. And you're like, dude, that's kind of cool. Right. And so like, those things that I didn't really even do that level when I was a kid, but I think those kind of experiences, just again, like my kids have been, tons of international travel and tons of travel and where like I went to Mexico one time before I got out of high school, right? Okay. I mean, with my parents, we drove to Mexico and that was it. And, obviously when I started working, flew a lot internationally and now I travel a ton, but I think there's different ways to sort of experience that. And, I do push her, like my daughter's 15, the youngest. And I'm like, you need to drive. Like, we need to, you're 15 and a half now. You need to get your driver's license. So we're like, this week, we're going to, go to DMV and take the test or whatever. She had to wait for some, online things she had to do first. But to me, like, even simple stuff, there's kids these days that don't want to drive. And I'm like, it's not optional. You need to learn to drive. Now, whether you decide to drive and take Uber or Waymo for the rest of your life, that's super fine. You don't have to have a car, but you need to learn to do certain things. And so for me, I would say some of these are forced grid, and they see the intensity that I put on them to do. I'm like, no, you need to grind on this. Like, we're not leaving the house till this is done or whatever. And it's annoying. But again, annoying in a very different way. When I grew up on the pig farm with like a military sort of background, father, like very different sort of background and sort of approach to like discipline and how things got done, that I turned out fine. But I think I've created, the life that we create for our kids is a lot better, but, arguably, which is, I think, great, but also it's more of a discussion based sort of like learn by example. I think, hey, you sell a company, and I've seen friends where like, yeah, I've sold it. I'm just going to quit working and just chill out and kind of be retired at home and not do anything. And I think that, is an opportunity where, hey, man, like that could not be the best way for your kids to, see that. And right. You need to, so I think, again, so I don't think there's a perfect answer. I definitely don't have it. But I think my view on that is that if I could have my kids raised on the farm, I would have. But like, let's be honest, I don't want to live on the farm right now. I like I love traveling. I love this internet game.
Yeah.
I love being in big cities, working with people. And that's not conducive to having a bunch of farm animals you got to feed morning and night and be there, 23 hours a day. Right.
Yeah.
So I think maybe someday I'll retire and go on the farm and have my 3 little pigs and some chickens and dogs running around. But I think for the current place that I am, I like what we're up to. And I'm more addicted to the digital game, for better or worse.
All right. Well, there's 3 questions that we always ask our guests. But before we get to them, if we don't ask you about AI, I think it's just not a podcast these days. So I have to ask you, because Scoble actually tweeted this the other day. He said next month is going to be the most crazy time in startup history because of AI. And I see it personally. I've been seeing basically this where all the different top players in AI are literally going to war right now. It looks like. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that statement can be played again. 2 months ago, you could have said that. I think in 6 months, you'll be able to say that the next month will be the craziest, because I think it's just an incredibly innovative and exciting time to see technology move at the rate that it's moving, and it's accelerating at a rate that's arguably unprecedented depending on how you measure it. And I think that's been cool. I think the foundational models and how they're sort of jockeying for who's number one, I think number one's relative. It's like number one in what? Solving a certain kind of problem and price performance in real time. Like for us doing voice, we can't use all these advanced reasoning models because they're not real time. Like we need things that can answer in, 50 or 100 milliseconds. And so those are different kind of models and different kind of tuning. So I also would say that like every month I try several tools, even probably every week we try another AI tool or run into one and try it. And so I think I have like this list of like the 35 tools we're using, and we're constantly updating of which one are we using for this? What are we using for note taking? What are we using for recording? What are we using for transcribing? What are we using for coding, for, editing things, for planning, for calendaring? Like, so we have a different AI for everything. And I think that to me is pretty cool that like the space is innovating that fast, but it's also like, we talked about learning earlier. Like I feel like I'm not learning fast enough. And so I think that's the other challenge that I'm constantly pushing myself. And I think Grok's the best for that. I mean, Grok sort of, because of its connection to X and having such arguably tip of the spear real-time nature of like what's been announced, what's coming up. Like literally one of my recurring tasks every Monday is me and my team go in and we type, what changed and what's new and what should we be reading in AI today. And, Grok comes back with a deep search of 25 things and we review them and talk about them. And it's a 20-minute thing where it just forces us to like essentially read the news in a way there's no way to read that. There's no Google article, TechCrunch article, or Wall Street Journal article. Whereas if you're reading like announcements and sort of viral threads on X every week in terms of like what's the hottest thing today, you're just seeing a tip of the spear. And some of it's quite garbage. Like you're like, this doesn't make sense, or what, this thing goes away. But I think a lot of stuff we've seen very early versions of, and it just help informs our thinking and, quite frankly, makes us, I think, more impactful on a given week.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And hopefully Robert doesn't hate me for saying this, but maybe we should query Grok. Does Robert Scoble say this every 2 months? No.
Yeah, he could. I think, and he wouldn't be wrong, right? I think he wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right. He would be correct. No, that was amazing. And like I said, we end the show typically with these 3 Qs is what I call them. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you these questions that are the first two are a little deeper and then the last one's a little bit easy. So the first one we always ask is, who's your hero in life?
Yeah, I mean, I think like my dad's like the easy answer, but I think like when I think about like who's had the most impact on my professional life, I think Tim Ferriss. Like when I read 4 Hour Work Week, it changed the way I think about it. Like a lot of my kind of systems and how I have, delegation and multiple. So I have 3 admins that kind of run 24 hours a day, 3 different 8-hour shifts. And so like all that sort of is inspired by like this idea of like, how do you really think about delegation and things like that? And so I think Tim Ferriss would be the, easy winner on that one in terms of impact that I've seen.
I was going to say earlier that Elon Musk owes you money for promoting Grok. And then I was going to, just after you said that, I'm like, Tim Ferriss also owes you a check. But anyway, second question is, who's a great role model? And you can list as many as you want, because I feel like society today needs more of them, or at least some that are broadcasted by intelligent people like yourself. So do you have any role models that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I think Naval's like a safe one, because I think there's just this positivity, sort of like pretty Zen, sort of almost Buddhist mindset that he presents. I think Elon's a very polarizing one. So I spent a lot of time with Elon during the Twitter acquisition, and that's probably another set of stories on its own. And talk about a guy who, when you ask him a question, pauses for many minutes sometimes before he answers, but incredible, what he's done, the impact. There's nothing more delightful than me getting in my Tesla and pushing a button and having it drive me sometimes hours at a time without interrupting it. Pretty incredible. And then watching spaceships land. And so I think but again, I realized that like, even in my own family and close friends, like there's people that, the word Elon to them is a 4-letter word, and not a good one. And it's a disappointing to see that for someone who, like I said, I've spent a lot of time with personally, and also just that the impact that he's had, while he's not always the most deliberate, and he's a little bit crass at times, but I think like he's not wrong, and he's like, his first principle stuff is so direct and painfully truthful, that I think that offends a lot of people. And so I think that's a tough one. But I think from an entrepreneur sort of capitalism, like pretty incredible from a like, how do you do things that are pretty extraordinary, and that things that people in the previous life would have thought were impossible.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. I wouldn't say I believe in the 4-letter word per se, but I have criticized a couple of things that he's said, but not on his business acumen. I have complete respect for his business acumen. Yeah. So that's great to hear, or very interesting at least. All right. So the last question is really easy, or hopefully it's easy. What's your favorite food, and where do you go get it? I've never asked that question. Do you have any favorite restaurants or anything that just makes you so happy when you eat?
Yeah, so that's an easy one for me. I have one in all my houses. I have a Ninja Creamy. It's like the ice cream maker. I eat ice cream every day. So it's like a high protein ice cream thing that I make every day. I'll probably have it after I work out here after this podcast. And that's like a slam dunk for me. I get it from my kitchen or my freezer. I make them in batches, and I'm addicted to the fat, but also just the idea that having like low sugar, 0 fat, super high protein ice cream that I can make myself and have every day is pretty delightful.
I've never heard of this. So what is this? Can you tell us?
It's called a Ninja Creamy.
Uh-huh.
And it's essentially you freeze like a pint container, and you mix up milk, and there's a gajillion. It's like super viral, like internet fad kind of thing, where all these people have had recipes and all these things, and you freeze this thing, you put it in the freezer, and then you stick this thing in the machine, and it looks like a food processor that's highly optimized, and it basically just runs an auger down it, grinds it up, and then creamies turns it into ice cream. And so you freeze it overnight. So it takes 24 hours to like freeze whatever your mix is. And there's an unlimited number of recipes online to try. And then, you freeze it. You can make everything from sorbets to acai. Like you pick your frozen treat, and then you grind it up, and you can literally recreate the McFlurry from McDonald's with no sugar if you want to go do that. And again, pick your flavor, pick your jam. But if you're an ice cream person or have ever liked ice cream, being able to make your own at home, and like I said, it takes about 5-10 minutes to do the process to grind it. And then, I literally eat a full pint and a half of that every day.
It's called Ninja Creamy.
Ninja is the name of the company. They make a bunch of like household, appliances, and then cream with an I, is the appliance. And they have 2. They have the Creamy, which is the regular one. And then they have the Creamy Swirl, which actually has a secondary thing where you can load the cartridge in it, like makes ice cream cones more like a, soft serve machine. But it's a little gimmicky because it's like, if you're loading it a pint at a time, like you're only going to make like 2-3 cones and then you have more stuff to clean. So I just have the regular one. Like I said, I got one in each of my houses. And so wherever I am, there is frozen ice cream and ready to go.
I'd love for people to learn more about you because of these great answers. I want to, you said you have a podcast, right?
Yeah. So I have a podcast called Founder Mode. So it's my friend Jason and I, we just talk to guests every week. So they usually come out on Tuesdays. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. So it's me, Kevin Henrikson, and then Jason Shafton. And then I have a newsletter, Founder Mode, so same name. And just, I really was inspired by the Paul Graham sort of founder mode thinking of like, there's so many times where I've snapped into that. I'm like, this is like the essence of something that I could write and talk about for forever. And so, yeah. And then, we published it on, like I said, all the kind of, wherever you get your podcasts.
Got it. No, you're going to see at least +1 on both of those after today's show. A lot of great advice. And one last thing, how do people get a hold of you if they want to?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter. So Kevin Henrikson on X, Kevin Henrikson on LinkedIn. Pretty simple. And then, yeah, there's an email address. If you reply back to my emails on my newsletter, I respond and read them all.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Brennan.
If your calendar isn't already set, you're missing out on startup wins. Industry leaders, top advisors, and incredible tips await. Come back for future great episodes and entertaining guests, and come back for more insider strategies and incredible stories from the brightest VCs, founders, and operator experts. We're bringing you the best in the business twice a month. Hit that bell and stay winning with Startup Wins. See you soon.